question. I don't know. It seems that if you do surgery, would make you, it seems like if you would do surgery, it would make you happy. And it's like saying, well, if I had a new coat, I'd be happy. And that's not going to solve the happiness problem.
People who specialize in the implant procedure, especially on children, will say, we put the implant on a child, his language and reading levels will improve. Well, that's misinformation, because actually it wouldn't matter if the child had the implant or not. It depends on where they're raised, the family influence, where they live, the environment.
So if parents can read, then children will read. There are many hearing children who are not able to read, and they can hear. Many. Children who have problems with reading are not few. There are quite a few. Spanish-speaking children, children from different environments that have problems with reading. So would you plan the implant for them also? What we wanted to focus on was more the entire issue of these children and their problems with reading. This is something that is more common among them related to the environmental issue in the homes and the process of reading. So deaf children in their homes and the environments that they're exposed to, this is what needs to be looked at rather than the surgical issue of the deaf children. Maybe we should implant the parents, and that might help them to be better teachers for their children.
For those children who have received the implant, if indeed that they have improvement in their reading or their educational achievement, I suspect it's because the parents have already invested $20,000 into that child, and they are motivated and they give them special attention, and I think that added attention from the parents causes the improvement, not the additional hearing. Really.
We talked with several adults who had lost their hearing within, recent years, maybe within the last 5 or 10 years. And many do feel quite comfortable. They receive some sort of comfort from the implant because in losing their hearing they were rather disoriented. They might have lost their hearing quite rapidly and felt quite disoriented. So they did receive some sort of a comfort level from the implant and being able to respond. We weren't at question to their feelings and to their experiences. We felt that if they were receiving a benefit, that was fine. What we're really concerned about is the issue of the comfort someone experiences being equated to ability to read or children's ability to read better, and that you'd be able to integrate better with the hearing population, which is not really true. People with the implant will still have difficulties associating with hearing people. Just like myself, who is hard of hearing, I still have problems interacting with hearing people.
And there's 2 different viewpoints here. It seems that there's a basic difference between each of the 2 viewpoints. And the medical community has a goal to make improvements to make eyesight as if it was normal. To make hearing as if it was normal, to make improvements on different body parts to bring them back up to normal, to the everyday. But the deaf community has a culture, and that culture, it has a cultural viewpoint which influences the way that deaf people as a whole tend to feel. They have their life. It's a full life. They socialize, they have goals, they have political goals. They have a social life. They get together. They go to basketball tournaments. They go to theater. They work. They go on with their life. And that is what you're going to see where there are 2 different viewpoints between the medical community and the culture. There's a leading surgeon for implants, Dr. House, and he says, I have a letter asking people to make donations to his institute, and it opens with this quote. It says, "To be deaf is to live in isolation, removed from the beauty of a symphony, to be without the supportive tones of a loved one's voice, the fire of an argument, the song of birds, the cry of a newborn baby." Now that is what the medical profession feels about deaf people.
The structure of the ear has evolved for millions of years. Okay? Now we have some new technology come up that may not relate. Well, we have the same thing happening with sign language. Obviously, it's evolved over millions of years as a language, and it has a purpose, so that people without hearing get together. They're organized. Now, this shows that we can go on through life without what the norm might experience. We have a feeling that if you have no hearing, you can't get through life. We have another way of being organized and having a purpose. Now, they don't seem to accept what we have. We see it as being very organized, but people look at us as being very disorganized. And we see it as being organized. They don't understand us, and that's our one concern here. We have an organized world, and we can't understand why they think we're so disjointed. That's what we're facing.
The medical community views hearing as a value, a cherished value, and cannot imagine people who don't experience music, crying, and a variety of other sounds. They can't imagine that they would be happy. Deaf people enjoy other things, beautiful sunsets, signing, dancing, body movements, other things that are visually important to deaf people. Why do the hearing community, why do they have to force the deaf community to accept their values? Why? Deaf people have their own values.
Well, we see them put up, like, for instance, $1 million and experimenting on monkeys. You know, they always study the animals first. If it works good on them, then they try it on humans. But anyway, this money they invest on the animals, these monkeys. Now, understand, these are deafened monkeys. Half of them get the implant. The other half don't. Now, they do a big, long research on these monkeys and go through all these procedures, and they find that really, well, basic difference between the monkeys with the implant and those without is that their behavior is a little bit better. So what does that mean? Does that mean that deaf behavior, our behavior is, we're like monkeys jumping around? We're not. We're humans. But they need to understand us as people, real people. The medical community, they feel it's part of their responsibility to, quote, end quote, cure us. They think that if we become hearing, we'll be eternally grateful. And that's their vision.
Often when a deaf child is born and grows up in a hearing world and becomes deaf, his parents often search for where to go, right?
Yes, that is true. Or when the parents discover that their child is deaf, the very first contact with the deaf community is in the medical profession.
Well, my son has a profound hearing loss. So he really has very little hearing that's usable for him. I continue to look for other ways, acupuncture, faith healing. I talked with many people, and calling crazy doctors in New Orleans who said that if you had the hearing aids on before 6 months, the hearing would come back, and here it was 8 months. Too bad, you missed the boat.
Is there surgery possible for replacing it? We're concerned about the children. Suppose we have a classroom of children and there's one child who's had a cochlear implant with the wires and the whole thing, and the other children tease that child. What about that child's self-image?
If the implant really worked and he were 5 years old, I think I would seriously consider the implant. And it would be my decision, or my family's decision, not his, because I wouldn't leave it to a 5-year-old child to make that decision.
To hear again, that's the question that deaf people have been asking. Do they want to hear again? And how do deaf people as a community and people in the deaf community as a whole feel about that?
Well, today we see people who are working on deaf people, and we look at the black people. Well, why don't they try to make black people into white people? Well, obviously, they have their pride, and I have pride too, being deaf. I cherish my deafness, you know? And you have all these hearing people that are trying to make deafness into normal. They want me to understand them, but no, I want them to understand me.
I don't think the implant is going to make you involved or not involved in, quote, the hearing world. I think it's the personality, it's the person, it's what the person brings to the situation that will make the person involved.
There's one interesting thing that my son did last year. He looked at me and he said, "Are you deaf?" And I said, "No." He said, "Is Daddy deaf?" I said, "No." is Caitlin, that's his sister, deaf? I said, no. And he went, he said, and I'm deaf. And I said, yes. And he said, I wish you were deaf, which I thought was really interesting. Instead of saying, I wish I were hearing, he said, I wish you were deaf.
I think some people forget that each of us here used to be a deaf child, that we ourselves were deaf children, and now we're deaf adults. And we asked ourselves, what concerns exist for a deaf child who becomes a deaf adult like we are? And as a child, what would we have wanted? So I think the primary concern we had and have is connected with implanting deaf children with such a crude system.
The GLAD ADHOC committee also made some discoveries that there are some problems with the cochlear implant.
The risks? Well, you could have facial paralysis. Not obvious. It would be very subtle and noticeable. Infection. And, well, of course, the risk could be that you'd benefit nothing. You'd have to go through that whole procedure and no results. And that's basically the risk.
Not only damage to the cochlea, but to other structures as well. Different devices have different damage potential, and I think a lot of the medical profession tries not to have damage, but it's very difficult to have no damage at all.
Anytime you undergo anesthesia, there is a risk with surgery.
The general issue is that only people who can't benefit from a hearing aid should receive the implant, but audiologists have noted that people who originally had hearing aids and went on to get the implant received either equivalent hearing or possibly worse hearing, and these also criterion were not followed strictly. At a time when maybe people were really sincerely desiring the implant, criterion might have been wavered in the name of experimentation, and people were willing to be experimented on. So we find that you can't always trust the clinics to strongly follow the criterion. If they can be flexible or ignore criterion for the name of research and science, then maybe we can find out something new about this experiment or these devices, and we're very concerned about this attitude.
There are frustrations after you get the implant and you get no benefit from it. And that's not a small thing. I read one report which said that 35% of the people who got the implant don't use it anymore.
Why would we want to prevent people from being able to have their hearing? Well, we in the committee persisted in our belief that you really aren't getting your equivalent hearing back with this device. It seems to me very difficult to imagine how a human being can invent some device to equate the ability to hear or to see or to taste or to have a sensation. We can't replace the heart accurately at this point, and the artificial heart is only good for a short time, and people who receive it aren't up and running the next day. They're very sick people, those who have artificial hearts, and it's not equivalent to a real heart or to a transplanted heart. We found ourselves really debating on why we would be preventing people from receiving their hearing if they indeed were getting something from the implant, something equivalent maybe to what a person with a hearing loss already had, but not equivalent to what a hearing person experiences. They would not be getting their hearing back.
And they can't discriminate human voices. They may be able to tell the difference between a man's or a woman's voice, but they can't make out the words. And they claim that with the implant, it improves lip reading. And maybe that happens, maybe, but that does not get a sound that is going to make them independent of their eyes when you try to receive the sound. But they claim that in their publication that you do get back sound, and at best you get back a few environmental noises, which